我分给你，我又要再进去，我现在只是 having a short break，可是真的很好笑，我翻给你看，就陈泰然老师，你就看。
那我要帮你拿。
So Annie, shall we go ahead and get started? We have 40 people who have made it back. And I'll just let Annie now go forward with introducing the last hour of the day. Over to you, Annie.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. So I am the moderator for this session with Kyle. So I've seen many interesting, like funny, really good display material, and I think 30 minutes is not quite enough. If you are like me, feel free to come back tomorrow and on Wednesday to continue to view those materials. Welcome all back to the last hour of today's workshop, today's program. Now we have a combined session of theme 1 and 2 plenary panel discussion. We will start this panel discussion with a summary from theme 1 and theme 2. So can I invite James Terry, who was in theme 1, to give us a summary of the theme first?
I can do that. Thank you, Annie, and other conveners for the chance to do this. So I see my job really is just a rapporteur to try to sum up a few of the major discussion points that we were having during the Padlet sessions immediately before the display material viewing. So essentially the session was divided into two different Padlets, and the first was hazard development under a changing climate. That was breakout discussion A, focusing more specifically on climate change and extreme events, and that was then followed by another half an hour or so, which was also theme 1 but breakout discussion B, the IPCC AR6 report and natural hazards. I do apologise if you keep seeing the side of my face and I look like I'm turning away from you. It's because I've got two screens, so you lot are all there and my other materials are just over here on that screen that you can't see. Anyway, Adam and Kristen and Annie and others did an excellent job, I think, of leading the discussion. It can be hard work sometimes to keep things moving along, but people were adding their comments and their points to the Padlets, and I think it worked rather well. My own reflections then on breakout session A, which was to remind you, climate change and extreme events. Well, many people were commenting on the need for longer data sets, that that lots of data sets exist, but they perhaps don't always go back very far. But also that many data sets perhaps exist but that are not easily accessible, and that these need much more to come into the public domain so that researchers and anybody else indeed, not only researchers, can have access to them and use them to their benefit. Part of this also will require data salvage. Lots of places around the world still have data that might be archived in sort of analog style formats that's not digitized, and will need to have work associated with that, often quite considerable work, to make sure that that data is salvaged and not lost before it can even then be made available. Another thing that came out, I think, from the discussions was just how many different problems around the world that are natural hazard and extreme event related to climate change there are, depending on where you live. So, Asia covers an extremely large region of the world. We won't even get into the discussion about the numbers of people, the population of the world, but even just the region, the area stretches everywhere from Arctic Russia, down to Southeast Asia, and then beyond into the Pacific. So there are many, many different kinds of extreme events and hazards that potentially could be affected by climate change. And a few of the commentators from the Philippines, Thailand, Korea, India, and elsewhere were mentioning everything from flash floods to wildfires to urban heat island impacts, heavy rain events, floods, and so on. So this means that there's a huge amount of work still to be done in understanding the potential for climate change to affect these different sorts of hazards, and certainly this needs to be ongoing for the future. I'm conscious of the time, so I better stop there for breakout session A. Section B was to do with the IPCC. I think a lot of the discussion was focused around the idea that although the work of the IPCC is seen as very valuable and important, and the science that goes into it is excellent, it is just a summary of what exists. The IPCC doesn't do its own research, and its job and its task is to synthesize what exists. And comments were made that perhaps in addition to the climate science, there ought to be a greater scope for introducing the findings from other disciplines that are potentially climate related and hazard related, such as geomorphology, archaeology, historical studies, sedimentology, and so on, that could have a valuable input into checking and truthing the sort of output from modelling projections. Because after all, as someone said, there are lots of opportunistic studies that are going on all around Asia, and if this could feed better into the IPCC, then that would be, I think, an important step forward, or what people felt would be an important step forward for AR7. So essentially, paleo studies, I think, was the theme that people felt could maybe be emphasised more in the future if there was a way of doing that. So that's my very quick summary. I've only got 5 minutes, so I have to save time for theme 2 as well. Feel free to add anything that I've missed, conveners. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much, James. Yes, this is also a reminder that all participants can put in your comments or questions in the chat box if you feel that we forgot something that are not mentioned in this panel plenary session. Please add that in the chat box. So now I would like to invite Kyle to give us a summary and a conclusion of the theme 2 session, because we were not there. We are interested in knowing how did your mapping exercise turn out and how did your discussion turn out?
Yeah, so let me share my screen and I will just briefly summarize some of the things that we did. So we started out with this mapping exercise, which I've never done before, and people were able to add examples of anthropogenic processes in, leading to natural hazards or technological disasters that they had experienced. I think from a practical perspective, this kind of exercise might need to be more common before people can really jump into and engage with it very quickly. So it needs like a spin up time, but we got there. And I was really impressed to see a number of different examples pop up that I wasn't previously aware of and that we could use to continue the discussion as we move forward. So then we moved into our small breakout rooms, and we had about between 4 to 7 people per breakout room, which meant that we could have really, I think, very interesting conversations between small groups of people. And we posted our conversation results onto these Padlets, and I'm showing an example of one here. So for the anthropogenic processes one, the first comment I would make is that we had a real diversity of people in the room for most of our discussion breakouts. Not just where people are from, but also kind of career stages and also kind of their guiding interests. So we had people from business, people from engineering, people from geology, scientists. And I think that what that highlighted was how interdisciplinary this problem really is, because so many different anthropogenic processes, so many different hazards. As Joel Gill showed, there's a matrix, right? And you have to try to connect these things. And in our groups, we were starting the work of trying to connect these things together. So I don't have a full summary or anything. I hope that the people who participated in it will have some reflections later on some of the things we talked about. I would say that one of the things that was highlighted really is how challenging research can be in this subject, and how a lot of the people responding were quite focused on challenges, I think, because maybe there's a problem-solving aspect to that that they can really engage with. So then we went to technological disasters and had another discussion with a separate group on these. And one of the main themes that I think that Bruce highlighted to me, and that I also noticed, is that there seems to be a real need for better training in this field, because people are coming from many different directions, and they have a lot of different experience, but what there aren't are specialists. There aren't people who actually really focus on many of these topics as a holistic thing. And so the participants were highlighting some of their concerns about grappling with policymakers and trying to take some of our scientific results and translate them into action, and some of the challenges involved in that. So I think hopefully during the coming reflections, maybe people who are participating in these discussions can highlight some of these topics maybe a little more. So that's it from us. I think we can move on probably to the next part of the session.
Thank you, Carl. Moving on to the next session.
Okay, do you want to do it?
You can do it, yes,
Okay,
please.
that's fine. Okay, so the next part of the section is we have 10 panelists, although Joel Gill, I don't believe, is with us now. And could everybody who was on a panel please take 1 minute to give some general reflections on the experience today, and then we'll move into questions from the audience and an open discussion. So let's just go down the list. Bruce, you were going to say something?
Yeah, can I just ask all panelists to show your videos? Sorry, I got the negative wrong there.
So that we can have a little bit of consistency and coherency. Let's go from theme 1's panelists first, and then move to theme 2. And then we'll try to mix some of the topics together in the questions. Ethan, how about you?
Yes, hi. So yes, so my 1 minute reflection, right? I don't have a video, I have my PDF, so I just speak it. So I think one important thing I have been thinking is that that's my personal feeling, that although climate models do produce tropical cyclone projections in the future, we often do not know why. It gives you the answer for everything, projection of frequency, rainfall, and everything. But there are so many different processes going on and many hypotheses that we do not know why. So I feel it is important to understand the physical mechanisms instead of just plainly relying on the projections, because many new research has shown that many of the projections are based on model biases. For example, the recent work by Jingjia Luo was saying the ENSO-like pattern was actually maybe an artifact. So I think these are the important area to draw attention. So that is what my personal reflection, what I think is important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Who is next? My slide has disappeared. James Terry, can you please give us again your 1 minute reflection?
Thank you, Kyle. Well, I was just impressed, I think, by the range of interest in cyclones. And of course, part of that is because in Asia, there are just so many people that are going to be exposed on the coasts in the future. There are so many people living on the coast now. There's so much more vulnerability that I think work on cyclone hazards is just going to be more important in the future than it ever has been. But something that really was new to me was thinking about the impacts in the highlands as well, thanks to what Kristin presented about impacts in mountain communities as well. And I think we mustn't forget that. We think of cyclones often as a coastal hazard, but it became very clear to me today that looking at landslides, erosion, mountain impacts is just as important as well. So that was my reflection. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So to continue that theme, Kristin, how about you?
Yeah, thanks. I guess I'm going to combine both of those comments. Yeah, I mean, what struck me is kind of how much more work there is to do, how much more data we need, and that if we kind of combine the notion of these highland impacts with the notion that we need to understand the physical basis of what's happening, right? And not just make predictions based on models that we maybe don't completely understand. I think that absolutely applies to the geomorphic impacts of these changing climatic regimes. The only way we can be able to predict things that we have never experienced is if we have a physical understanding of what's going on in these systems. So I think that's an important thing to think about moving forward.
Great, thank you for that. Adam, how about you?
I'm not going to say much about science. I'm going to talk about the novelty of what we did today. I actually really enjoyed the Padlets and watching people engage and things pop up on the screen. So yeah, big thanks to Bruce for encouraging us to go down this route. I really enjoyed it. And in terms of the science, the two things that came out for me were the data that we need more data, whether it's physical data or whether it's archival data or whether it's historical data from novel archives. It's fundamental to understanding the extreme in the hazards analysis part. And the other thing is that the IPCC AR6 report, the extremes chapter 11, all 300 plus pages of it is a really fundamental advance on what's been done before, but there's still work to be done. And a lot of extreme value analysis is still being done on records that only go back to 1950. And if you're looking at the 1 in 100 to 1 in 500 year events, you're very unlikely to get them in a statistical sense by looking at records from 1950. And so, you know, it's data and its need for integrating long records. And I think one of the fundamental things that came out in our Padlet was this comment that, you know, maybe we need to engage in the IPCC process a little bit more to try and get the message across that if we're looking at extreme events, we do have to look at these longer multi-decadal to centennial records.
Thanks, Adam. Annie, how about you?
Yeah, I'm continuing to talk about the data availability issue. We see that like we have different, like inconsistent availability of data in different parts of the world. And there are sometimes, well, there is times that we heavily focus on one type of hazard and not the other type. And it kind of also relates to the problem of budget and funding. Some countries and some researchers are not getting enough funding to collect data for analysis. So yeah, I think it's moving forward, we would need more funding to support research. Probably projects that should be supported may be focusing on new hazard types in those areas. So sometimes funding agents or grant agency are more likely to give funding to projects that study a high risk type of hazard, but with a shifting hazard pattern. Some areas may encounter new types of hazards, so they should also be supported. And also, well, we need to look at the longer term variability of different oscillation and how they interplay the interaction of different things. Yep,
okay,
thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we can move on to theme 2, the human-induced hazards and technological disasters theme. And again, let's just go down the list on the slide. So Fatma, what are your 1-minute reflection on the exercises that we did today?
I think Fatma is not here.
Is she not here? Okay. I can't see the, okay, we'll go down the list. I'm next. All right, so one of the things I thought was really interesting about our discussions and our session. Was it?
She says she's here, but she's not in the panelists.
Oh.
She's an attendee.
Oh, she got put into the attendees.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we fix that while I
You summarize.
Yeah, so Kyle, please continue with your 1-minute summary.
Okay, I'll continue with my 1-minute summary. So I thought it was really interesting how everybody who showed up in our session was from a really different perspective. And I think one of the things that's interesting about this topic is that people get dragged into the topic of natural hazards and human-induced natural hazards and technological disasters because of something that happens surrounding their work, but they don't enter the subject directly from when they're young. And so a lot of times people are trying to build back a foundation of understanding from where they entered the field. And I think that that's kind of what we were doing during our breakout sessions to some degree, is like trying to figure out where we all are, what do we know, what do we not know. And so I really think that one of the interesting challenges that we face in this field is moving towards a scenario where people have a broad, holistic understanding of things before they really have to grapple with it. How can we build up that kind of capacity in the field? I think that's a really interesting problem that came out that I was not expecting in the session. Okay, so enough of me. Let's move on to Agung. What are your reflections?
Okay, thanks, Kyle. Yeah, this is an interesting meeting because we can talk on 2 ways. Not only we listening someone presenting their research, but we can involve in the discussion with a different point of view because of different background of experience and also field of interest. And using Padlet, so it's we can combine all the idea easily. So it's nice, and I would like to adopt this method, I think, to discuss with my colleagues or my student here. Yeah, I think that's nice. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so now we have Fatma is rightfully amongst the panelists again. What are your reflections?
Thank you very much, Carl. So yes, it's a very interactive and interesting method to discuss amongst us. And I think I would like to add up also the method and also the interactive maps. If we can use that, would be very great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I guess we will probably end now with Bruce. How about you?
Okay, so thank you. So you've already mentioned career paths, and I think this is something that has come out both when Kyle and I and Agung were preparing for as conveners of the anthropogenic processes and technological disasters, is it's very hard to find experts who have systematically studied anthropogenic processes or technological disasters. Generally, we're very either single hazard focused, or we're very, I'm going to be an engineer and I'm going to study dams. And we don't think holistically across them. So the question is where that career path will come from. And this also came out in the Padlets. The other one is reflecting on what Adam and a couple of others have said. They're talking about data. And one of the things I have found when I've tried to systematically look at anthropogenic processes, and we're doing a lot of work now in a number of global South countries, is where do you get a good overview of case studies from? They're not published because they don't make for good peer review articles. And so you have to look in government reports and YouTube videos and newspaper reports to get a good systematic understanding of the anthropogenic processes that are facing. And this came through in a number of the Padlet comments in our theme 2 today. People were talking about case studies, and I was thinking, oh, gee, I'd like to get that one, or where is that written up, or is this just local knowledge? Do I have to talk with people? And so I know that over the past 9 or 10 years, I've gone from a very physical scientist studying geophysics with mathematics and computers to learning a lot about social science methodologies, just so I can start gathering information. And this came through a lot in the interdisciplinarity of the Padlet comments and discussions today. So I'll close my 1-minute reflection there.
Okay, so it sounds like there are some parallels in terms of data availability and access between the two different themes. One trying to reach backwards in time and one trying to reach into more diverse kind of sources of information. All right, so I guess the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to move into an open question phase. Annie, do you want to start the moderation of this?
Yeah, so we want to invite questions from the audience. If you have a question, please pop that in the Q&A box and we'll answer to your questions. So I'll make a start. Well, so theme 1 looked at geohazard occurrences and likelihoods due to the changing climate condition. And theme 2 looked at human influences on natural hazard risk and technological disasters. How can we combine these approaches or the hazards types to build a more integrated perspective on the impact of disasters and hazards in the future? I think, Bruce, it may be linked to what you said just now. How did you cross over from one side to the other?
Yeah, so the question here is how we, sorry, could you repeat the question?
How can we combine the two approaches, like geohazards and like looking at the natural hazard risk and human influences on technological disasters?
So for me, the way of combining these sorts of the hazard, the exposure, the vulnerability is really through scenarios. And so we're trying to put together scenarios in a systematic way of thinking of, here are the different hazards, and it could be climate change, it could be land use change, it could be someone putting rubbish in a river drain, and then thinking about the scenarios of how the different hazards and the human influences will evolve over time. Now, I'm just going to take another second here. The European Union right now is putting together a disaster risk database. And so I've been meeting with a number of the people there, Joel and myself and a number of others, and they had come to us and said, how do we bring in multi-hazards into this? And it also is related to anthropogenic processes and climate change. And what's very interesting is they have brought in the hazard. So they've brought in the probability of given storms and fire and earthquakes and tornadoes into this database. Great. So we have the intensity of the hazard. They've brought in exposure. So where are buildings, where are roads? They haven't really brought in vulnerability. And so it's not completely risk, but it's static. And so they're not doing this in time. And so they're not saying the time of year will make a difference. And so this is something I would like to see introduced is time, and then start to think through these scenarios. If I have an earthquake, this will trigger landslides. Now, if humans are involved, there might be land use change involved in this. And the question is how we bring these in. So this is basically my way of starting to integrate these two themes of climate and anthropogenic processes. Is in the future, we can't only think about the hazard of climate changing, how much the temperature is increasing, what greenhouse gases are doing, what the serious natural hazard extremes will be, but we also need to be thinking about the people involved. What's the migration patterns going to look like? Where will people be building? How will this change? What will be the characteristics of those people? Okay, so I've spoken a bit too long there. Go ahead.
Thanks, Bruce. Anyone want to add anything?
I guess we can move on to another question. I'll handle this. So Kristen has placed a question in the chat, which I think is basically equivalent to volunteering to answer a question as well. So I'm going to direct a question towards Kristen, which is based on a comment by Sigrid. What is your sense about the relative value of specialization versus kind of a more holistic approach to understanding the kinds of problems that you're currently working on?
Yeah, I think Sigrid makes a good point. Yeah, kind of, I remember it was about kind of the evolution of the field of geography. Yeah, I mean, the difficult thing is that as our fields become more complicated, as we learn more and there's more techniques and there's more data and there's more, it gets harder and harder to be an expert in everything, right? And so yeah, I feel like the holistic approach is getting difficult, because if we are, say, a physical geographer, we have to spend a lot of time learning this whole field. And can we also say something meaningful or do something meaningful in the human geography world? We won't have as much training as a proper human geographer. So is it reasonable to have people, single people wearing both hats, or do we need to do a better job of initiating and maintaining collaborations and communication? I don't really have the answer for that. I certainly feel completely out of my depth going into the more human side. I don't know this field and the standard practices and so on. So yeah, I agree. It's an important challenge.
Good answer. To follow up a little bit, I think we have some time. Can you think about making it a little more concrete? If you had one technique, like a science technique that you don't have now that you could master, and also one part of being a holistic visionary that you could get the answer to. Do you know what those would be in terms of like the problem of typhoons impacting like Taiwan?
Oh, that's a difficult one. Yeah, in terms of the scientific technique, I have not really worked with sedimentary archives at all. So I tend to do active monitoring. Yeah, I think it'd be quite interesting to learn that, to be able to do it. Yeah, in terms of the human side, I mean, I would say it's the whole field. I mean, yeah, how to best say communicate with local communities to delve their understanding of the systems that they're living in. You know, how to best conduct interviews and to best interact and kind of, I don't want to say extract isn't maybe the right word, but to elicit maybe the local knowledge in the most effective way. I would really like to have a better handle on how one does that.
Okay, thank you, it's very insightful.
Yeah, I can turn that around on you, Kyle. What would you say?
What was the question again? Like you're talking about the second question, the one I asked you like about specific things, or just in general?
You can do both if you like.
My sense is, I come from a background where I generally am an epistemological interloper. So like something will happen that gains my interest and I will go in. So I'm quite used to like trying to develop new material or new methods in science, like take on new things like that. That doesn't scare me. What scares me, I guess, is not knowing sometimes what the context is for my conclusions. And so I think, you know, if we work in a region, like we might work in one region and then another region, the way we talk about things, the way we frame our results will often be taken in different ways. And this is your question, like how do we avoid political problems, or how do we deal with political problems when we're working on anthropogenic hazards? And I don't think that if there was a very nice, simple answer to that, I wish somebody would have told me that. But I think the main thing is to approach the problem with sincerity and understanding that there is no one best way, and you have to engage with people, knowing that maybe your goals may not be the best outcomes, right, in a given situation. So yeah, it's a very complex topic. I would agree.
Yep, so I've got a question from the audience. So this question is for Fatma, asking what is an appropriate career path from your perspective in becoming knowledgeable about a broad range of technological disasters? So maybe what's your experience? What's your background?
Yes, so I think the collaboration with the industry is quite increasing my experience. So rather than only doing the research, but we combine between the research and industrial experience, so we'll be enhancing our knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have something to share about their journey? If no, then I'll ask this. I think it's a question, like combined question from Adam and Kristen about data sharing. How do we avoid, like to what extent can we share our data? Some people would just take it and run away. So yeah, we know that sharing data is important, but we also understand that in many countries, people don't trust foreigners, or they don't trust people that they don't know personally. So do you have any experience, advice, or insights into this question? To what extent can we share our data with others? Anyone?
Well, I can start with a quick comment. One of the things that we talked about during the Padlets was this increasing portfolio of data-based journals that are encouraging people to build databases and publish them. And you know, I think the general sense is that this is a really good idea. And building those data sets takes time. People deserve credit for it, but yeah, it is somewhat fraught with an element of risk that you're putting your data set out there that you may have spent years and years and years developing in your country or with a collaborative group of other people, and they're putting it out there for everybody to use. And you don't really then have control over the use of those data sets. And so the vulnerability is there. And I think it goes hand in hand if you look at the question of, particularly for in-country data sets being used by people from outside, it's a very sensitive topic in the way that technological and anthropogenic disasters is a sensitive topic at times. The actual data sets from particular countries can also be a very sensitive topic at times. And so it's a tricky thing to try and navigate. But there is, at the same time as these data journals are coming up, there's this very clear movement towards understanding how to move away from some of the imperialistic practices that researchers had for centuries, not decades, centuries. And that movement needs to go hand in hand with data sharing and the acknowledgement that the data that comes from countries requires people from that country to be involved. And you know, we have 2 Indonesians here, and Indonesia's got very, very strict rules on research data sharing because of bad experiences in the past primarily. And so, you know, we have to be very aware that if you're working in a country that is not your home country, there are very simple practices that we need to push forward. And I think a platform like this is a perfect platform to discuss that. So I'd be interested to hear what everybody else has to say.
Yeah, I agree that building the relationships can be is very important. Can be very important for getting access to data. Yeah, I mean, with kind of the work that our group has been doing, yeah, it's a lot of government collected data. So the National Hydrological Agency or the National Seismological Agency. And so this also makes it a bit, yeah, it's not the type of data or the type of data collection that would go towards, for example, a data publication. You know, it's kind of this regularly collected archive. And yeah, it's understandable that there is concern about colonial science and people coming in and not using it well. And so building these relationships is really important, but it also can be, I mean, there are some data sets we've been negotiating for now almost 5 years from certain government agencies that I won't name, you know, with full involvement and cooperation and all of this. And yeah, it can really get in the way of making progress in certain areas. And yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons I asked about the political aspects of the anthropogenic disasters is that, you know, if you are working on something that has the potential to, say, reflect not so well on certain players, yeah, I can see this can cause real problems for your ability to continue to work and to continue to access data in some places. And so this was certainly a surprise to me when I started working in Asia, in some parts of Asia. It's just the whole politics around being able to yeah, move forward, to get data, to work with certain collaborators. And yeah, it's a challenge.
I'd be interested to get the thoughts of Gung and Fatma. Fatma, maybe if we could get your comment on data sharing with people outside of the home country.
Yeah, I think data sharing within the ASEAN and also Asia Pacific has been conducted through several platforms. Like what we have done through the Asia Pacific Rim Universities Network, or APRU, and also we also share for during AUA as well. So by sharing through those network, I think data sharing, research collaboration, as well as teaching collaboration are occurs. Thank you.
Thank you. And Agong, do you have something to add, please?
Yeah, that data sharing sometimes is difficult if we don't have like the exchange of data like that. So because if there is agency, there's already a data, and then if we can exchange within the agencies, so it means that the agency have their own data. It means that it's to complete the data. It's very be better, I think. Yeah.
So maybe
And
collaboration is the
collaboration. Yeah, becoming the collaboration, because if there is no collaboration, then data sharing, I think it cannot be conducted. Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe we have to collaborate with agency to make sure that they can look at our final manuscript or in a draft form.
Yeah.
So to give them some confidence that the data that they share with us has been used properly.
Yeah.
Does James want to add something? Thanks, Agong.
I don't mind if just for a minute or two. I think there are lots of different perspectives about this, and I think, to be positive, we've come a very long way from where we were, say, 3 decades ago. You know, I can see things from different directions, because I can remember my experience being in the Pacific, working in the University of the South Pacific. You know, you'd have consultants coming in from overseas, from surrounding, let's call them developed countries nearby. I won't mention which ones they were, but often you get these highly paid consultants coming in and saying, "Oh, I've heard you've done work on floods." And you'd say yes. And they'd say, "Well, can I have everything you've got for the last 30 years on floods?" And you'd think, well, hang on, it's taken me, you know, half of my career to get this together through friendships, through alliances, and so on. And so I can understand the reluctance sometimes to want to share this. But then on the other hand, you know, we must remember that in many countries, the data is being collected with public money. And therefore, in a way, I think it's up to us a little bit to sort of lobby and make sure we keep the pressure on, you know, government agencies that are tasked with collecting the data, such as rainfall, for example, to make sure they understand that, you know, taxpayers' money is often been used to collect it, and therefore it should be more accessible. But then again, it does take people time and effort to dig it out. You know, if you as a scientist want to come along and say, well, I'd like this data, please, someone's got to go and get that and access it from the archive, which from that perspective, you know, it's fair when you're paying for it. You know, a fair amount of expense should be included in accessing this this material. And I think the idea of including these sorts of people from agencies as co-authors on publications, for example, and reports and outputs and projects, it is very important to make them realize that we're not collecting this information for any nefarious reason, but only to advance and push forward science. And after all, frameworks like the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction call upon this kind of thing for much better access and exposure. And as I say, on the positive side, we've got wonderful new websites. You know, for example, the IBTracks website on cyclone tracks, which can be accessed by anybody now, free of charge. And you know that it's been vetted and it's been checked and double checked, so you know the data is usable as well. So I think we need to be fair to the countries which have spent money collecting this, especially if they're poorer nations. You know, you need to pay for the data. But I think that if these people are included a lot more in the research activity, then they would perhaps be on board a lot more than they have been in the past.
Thanks for this positive ending answer. Thanks. Kyle, do you have another question?
Well, I have a bit of a comment, actually, to continue on this interesting perspective. We're coming from so many different experiences. It's nice to talk about it. One of the things I think is really positive that we can do better is not just data, getting and moving data, but is providing tools for people to analyze that data themselves. And the more work we can do translating our scientific skills into things that people can actually use on their own data it's a force multiplier like you couldn't believe. And so I think that every time we write a paper, if we think about like, well, how can we take the methods that we used and translate them into something that somebody can actually use on their data without having to contact us about it, you know, put it on GitHub and like let them do it. I think that that resolves a lot of issues that we've traditionally faced. And I would really encourage people to think much more about the perspective of being a young scientist in one of these countries, right? You may have data, but you may not have the ability to analyze it yourself. So just unlock that potential. So that's my point on that. It's not just about data, it's about methods. Yeah.
So I would follow up on that, combined with this question from the attendee. How can we encourage open source for data in Asia? And how can we encourage researchers to share the methods that you have mentioned? So how do we give them treats?
I think the first thing is people can lead by example. And then they can talk about the successes that leads to. That's the first thing. The messaging can be very clear because my experience with this has been only positive. And so I think the more that we talk about it and the more people know that this is something that can happen, the better off we are to begin with.
Bruce, do you want to add?
Yeah, so maybe I'm becoming, as I get a tiny bit older, a little bit more negative about let's do good examples, let's form a collaboration. And I think that things, you know, I wouldn't have said this 20 years ago, but I think things need to be regulatory or there needs to be money involved. There has to be something in it for people. And so I would argue in the UK, they did make a difference by making sure that as part of grant rules, you had to make open access your data. Great. That was regulatory and it's actually followed up. Was it also something that we as scientists wanted to do? Sure, but we had this added impetus. And when we are doing projects in the Global South, we can say, I'm sorry, we got this money, but we must make this data open access and available. So there's that. Publications, when they say the data you use for publications must be open access, great. Money, you know, there needs to be some sort of funding to help make things open access and to encourage information. So I agree with what people are saying. It's great. We need to collaborate, everyone benefits, but there also do need to be some sticks and carrots involved. I think that might be an American term. So
yeah, I would say it's the same in Australia, that it's in our funding rule that we need to put our data somewhere, to deposit it somewhere. So yeah, to answer to the question of how, I think individual granting agency and countries may have to do something to help with this process. Do we have any last question from you, Kyle?
Well,
or
I guess one question that I have after all of this, maybe to sum up, this might be a good question to end with, that kind of tries to connect the themes again. So we know that changing climate is going to lead to a dynamic risk situation, right, where we have to try to look into the future. But we also know that more and more people are working on things like anthropogenic hazards and technological disasters and are trying to get ahead of the problem rather than always following the problem. So my question to the panel is, who do you think is going to win? Like, is the enhanced risk from changing climate going to cause more and more of these major disasters, or will, like, over time, will we make a difference enough that when these things occur, we've already mitigated them? Like, are you positive or negative in some sense about that future? I'm very curious what the panelists think about that. Maybe Annie, you could answer it first.
Who is going to win?
Are the challenges that are going to face us due to climate change going to outrace our ability to get ahead of mitigating disaster? Or are we going to make a difference fast enough?
I'm quite optimistic. I think we can beat it, but maybe after some years when we have experienced more disasters and people would finally decide to put in more funding and efforts to make a change. So
okay,
that's
you're
it from me.
Optimist. Okay, I'll go across. Bruce, how about you?
I mean, that's a hard question to answer, and it's going to be out of my lifetime, I hope. But you know, at the rate we're heading right now, yeah, okay. I don't want to be negative on this, and it is kind of like who's going to win. You know, the ways we're heading right now, humanity is not going to be winning in the next 50 years.
So I'll chalk you up as a not optimistic necessarily.
With our current skills and tools, the way we're heading, we have the abilities, but we don't have the politics.
Okay, let's move on. James, how about you? How do you feel about the future in terms of these fields?
Well, I'm worried for particular groups. I don't want to be overly pessimistic either. I think we're doing a lot. We're moving forward. We've got new techniques and tools. There's AI, and there's machine learning. There's just so many new fields which are going to help us, and I think this is fantastic. But I can think of some examples of people living on atolls in the Pacific that are in the typhoon belt or the cyclone belt. With sea level rise, I just think that the prognosis is just not looking good, and I think those people in particular areas are going to need special attention for adapting or finding the right kinds of solution. But elsewhere, floods in Europe, wildfires in the Mediterranean, I think we can find ways to tackle these kinds of things if we work hard enough.
Okay, I'll put you in the optimistic. So Agung, how do you feel about the challenges that we face and our ability to work to mitigate these kinds of challenges? You're muted, I'm sorry. I can't hear you.
Pardon? Could you please to
Yeah. So as you look into the future, based on your experience in Indonesia especially, as you look into the future, do you think the challenges posed by climate change are going to outrace our ability to mitigate disasters, or do you think that we'll be able to mitigate things more?
Yeah, I think for climate change also, it's related with the hydrometeorological disaster. So we optimistic that we in Indonesia can mitigate, especially because of now BMKG, that meteorological agency in Indonesia is getting very active, yeah, for monitoring for meteorology. And the problem, I think, still that we have many small islands, especially in eastern part of Indonesia, and in that area also the infrastructure is not, I think it's not so good as western part, I think, yeah. So we're still facing some problems, especially for the eastern part of Indonesia. As you remember that last year that we have also some cyclone problem in the island of Flores. It is a small island in the area, and then and for us, hydrometeorology related with the climate change disaster is not aware yet, because most of us, I think, in Indonesia, we aware with earthquake, tsunami, landslide, and volcano. And for us, the cyclone or other say hydrometeorological, either due to the climate change, is new things, and we facing for the new disaster, and yeah, we try to to do more research.
Okay.
And thank you.
Thank you for that. So I don't think we have enough time to go down the list. So you know, if you have an opinion, you know, sorry I didn't make it to you. Can we wrap up the session today?
So we'll hand back to Bruce and Adam to close today's session.
Okay, well, I guess I can start because Bruce is muted. So while Bruce is muted, I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody for attending today and for participating in particular. I think all the sessions had great participation. It was great to see a good turnout from many different countries and many different people. So I think that's all I really wanted to say. Day 2 tomorrow looks very, very exciting, builds on some of the themes from today. So if we look at day 2 tomorrow, which is, I can tell you, is natural hazards in the mega cities is theme 3, and monitoring and methods is theme 4. It looks like there's some very cool short talks and some good discussions and some mind mapping and a group of panels. So, and we'll get to go and see the display material again, and we'll also have a keynote speaker tomorrow, which is a bit different to today. Guofeng Ma from the Institute of Earth Sciences at Academia Sinica and National Central University will be giving a keynote tomorrow evening Singapore time. So please make sure you attend day 2. Bruce, you want to add something to that?
Not much to add, just thank you everyone for coming. And as always, we will start tomorrow at 7 o'clock GMT or 1500 GMT plus 8. We have a lot of things. If you get lost, remember to go back to the program, which has all of the links in it for each part. So thank you again for attending, and thank you very much also to the panelists and the conveners for today for all of your contributions. So thank everyone for all of the contributions for everything, and everyone who is so active in the Padlets and the discussions.
Okay, thank you everybody, and bye for now.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Bruce. Bye-bye.
Well done. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.